Most people think of ghosts as things you see, but in Venezuela, there's one you hear. And if you hear it the wrong way, it might already be too late. This is the story of El Silbón, the Whistler, and what I experienced in a remote village in Apur still keeps me awake to this day. I arrived in Venezuela in mid-August. It wasn't an ordinary trip. I was working on a project about enduring folklore in South America. The place I landed in was Apur, near the Colombian border, a lowland rural area, sweltering hot, thick with the smell of burned grass. The people here live simply. Many don't use phones, have no internet. I rented a room in the house of Mr. Ramiro, a man in his 60s, tanned skin. Quiet, but his eyes always gleamed with a watchful glint. On the first evening, as we sat on the porch, I asked about El Silbón. Ramiro didn't look at me. He just sighed quietly. If you want to hear it, then listen. But don't ask more afterward. Around here, people don't joke about whistling sounds. Ramiro told me. El Silbón is a wandering spirit, often appearing late at night, especially near the fields and forest edges. The most disturbing part is the whistle. If you hear it up close, it means it's actually far away. But if it sounds distant, then it's right behind you. Many locals believe that if you hear all 7 notes of the whistle, you could be cursed. But what gave me chills wasn't the story. It was how Ramiro stared into the pitch-black distance as he spoke. That night, I lay in my room with only a flickering yellow bulb. Around 3 a.m., I woke up feeling a cold draft slip through the window. Even though the night was stifling hot, then I heard a soft, drawn-out whistle. It wasn't echoing. It wasn't even. It sounded like someone struggling to whistle but running out of breath. I sat up immediately, straining to hear again. Once, then twice. The third time, I heard slow footsteps on the dry ground outside, as if someone was walking past the wall of my room. I didn't dare go out. The next morning, Ramiro said nothing. He only asked, "Did you sleep well?" A few days later, I went into the forest with Ramiro to find an old abandoned hut, a place where a man once heard the whistling and then vanished. The forest here wasn't what I imagined. It wasn't cool or lush. It was muggy, suffocating, and the smell of mildew and mud clung to your clothes within minutes. Insects swarmed around my face. By around 5 p.m., Ramiro signaled a stop. He said, "We turn back now. No one goes deeper after this hour." As I turned, I saw something that made my skin crawl. An old torn sack hanging from a tree branch, swaying. Inside were what looked like dried animal bones, wrapped in burlap soaked from the rain. I asked Ramiro. He said nothing, just quietly took the sack down, left it at the base of the tree, and told me to move quickly. That night, I couldn't sleep. The room was too silent. Then, around 1 a.m., I heard the creaking sound of a wooden chair being dragged across the porch, as if someone was sitting down and getting up, again and again. I crept out, peeking through the door crack. No one was there, but the chair was still slightly rocking, as if someone had just stood up. I went back into the room, but as I closed the door, I heard a short whistle right beside my left ear, so clear that I whipped around instantly. No one. I left Apur 2 days later. Before I got on the bus, Ramiro simply said, "You don't need to tell anyone. What you saw and heard, it's just a feeling, but never dismiss a feeling. Sometimes it's the only sign we're still alive." After returning home to Colorado, I began writing about the experience. But the more I wrote, the more exhausted I became. sleep deprived, unable to focus. Every night, I kept hearing faint sounds, like wind hissing or a shallow whistle, always between 2 and 3 a.m. I set up a voice recorder in my room, left it running through the night. The next morning I played it back. There was a faint static, then a sound like soaked fabric dragging slowly across the floor, soft, rhythmic. I can't say for sure that I encountered El Silbon, but I know one thing. I heard sounds when no one else was around. I felt a presence, even though I couldn't see anyone. And those who were around me, after I told them the story, some started having sleep issues too, as if something had spread, not a virus, but a quiet obsession. I left the city. I now live in a remote mountain area with no nearby neighbours. I've stopped talking about El Silbon, but on some nights, in the silence of the pine forest, I still hear a faint whistle in the distance, like wind slipping through stone cracks, but with rhythm, with an end note, as if someone is still out there wondering, and I knew to tell the old story too. 3 months after my grandmother passed away, the house became strangely quiet. Her departure wasn't loud, no crying, no crowd, just a spring morning when she didn't wake up. I stood by her bedroom door for a long time, looking at the blanket pulled up to her chest, her face calm, as if she was only sleeping. But it was that stillness that made my throat tighten. She was no longer there, and from that day on, the house felt different. No more soft slippers dragging across the wooden floor. No more quiet coughing before dawn. No more scent of medicated oil or warm tea. Just me, and the kind of silence I didn't know how to fill. I had moved in with her during college, partly because the campus was close, partly because she didn't want to live alone. After her passing from heart failure, I stayed, out of habit, and because I wasn't ready to leave. She died in spring. Now, it was midsummer. There were no more knocks on my bedroom door in the early morning, no more mumbling of, "Have you eaten yet?" No more gentle clinks of her favourite porcelain cup. Only the ticking of the wall clock, the steady hum of the ceiling fan, and the quiet of a house that had lost the one person who spoke the most. The strange thing started one afternoon when I came home from school. I stepped into the kitchen and saw her white porcelain teacup, the one with the faded blue flower pattern, sitting neatly on the table. I stopped. I clearly remembered putting that cup away the day she died. I hadn't touched it since. It was too familiar, too heavy with memory. I picked it up. It was clean, but warm, like someone had just washed it and set it there a moment ago. I told myself maybe I'd taken it out in the morning and forgot. Maybe. But something inside me wasn't quite convinced. That night I was reading on the sofa, soft yellow light from the table lamp painting shadows on the wall. As I stood to head to bed, I caught a glimpse of something on the back of the chair by the door. Her grey scarf, the one I had folded and stored in a memory box under my bed. I walked over and touched it. It still held that familiar scent, a mix of gentle face powder and menthol oil. Faint but clear. I didn't know why it was there. I didn't remember taking it out. But I wasn't afraid. There was just one quiet, undeniable feeling inside me. Someone was still here, in a way that was soft and kind. In the days that followed, I started noticing more. Every morning the living room window would be open, just slightly, even though I remembered closing it the night before. The white curtain fluttered gently in the morning breeze, sunlight spilling through at the perfect angle, just like it used to when she was still alive. She always opened that window early. She used to say, "Let the house breathe." At first, I thought it was a habit, but I started checking. Every night, I'd make sure it was shut, and still, it would be open. The same amount, no more, no less. Exactly as she once did. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want it explained away with logic. Didn't want anyone laughing, calling it imagination. I just began to accept it. That sometimes you don't need to see something to know it's there. I put the teacup back where she used to keep it, just beneath the high shelf, beside the old tin of tea. I folded the scarf neatly and left it on the chair. I stopped closing the window at night, and each morning I said it out loud, softly, like a ritual. "Good morning, Grandma." One evening, after working late, I came home and stepped into the kitchen, and I smelled it. Rice porridge with ginger. Faint, like the scent left after lifting the lid, then putting it back on. I looked around. The stove was off, the pots untouched. Nothing had been cooked. But that smell, it made me freeze in place. And I knew. She hadn't come back to scare me, hadn't moved things around to confuse me. She had simply stayed. Some part of her was still here, in the air, in the scents, in the small things we once shared. Not a ghost, not a spirit, just love. That hadn't gone away. I arrived on Belle Island, Newfoundland, in the middle of November. It wasn't a planned trip. I had just intended to drive along Canada's eastern coastline, capturing some early winter landscapes for a documentary photography project. Belle Island was suggested by a local in St. John's. That island's strange, he told me. Foggy almost all year round, and there are old iron mines from the war era. If you're into photography, you'll definitely find something worth remembering. I didn't believe in ghosts, but I've always been drawn to desolate places. Places that once held life and were left behind. They make me feel like I can almost touch forgotten memories, layers of time still clinging to the earth. The ferry took me across through a thick, flowery fog. There were only 3 of us on board. Me, a middle-aged woman, and the driver. Out on deck, the wind carried the salty sting of the sea, the smell of engine oil, and a creeping cold that slowly soaked through my sleeves. As the island came into view, faint and blurred, I felt something I still can't quite describe, like time moved differently here. I rented a small wooden cabin perched near the cliffside, overlooking Lance Cove. It had been rebuilt from an old storage shed and still carried the scent of rotting wood, moisture, and cold stone. The air inside was thick, like a basement sealed off from the wind, even though outside, the gusts never stopped. The low ceiling, cast iron stove, and scratchy wool blanket reminded me of childhood winters back in Ohio. The next day, I hiked down to the southern part of the island, where the iron mines had once operated in the early 1900s. The main entrance was sealed shut with iron bars, but ventilation shafts still jutted out from the moss-covered ground. The damp grass surrounding them felt soft, spongy, almost too alive under my boots. Somewhere nearby, I heard the faint drip of water. Every step echoed back from deep underground. The metallic smell of rusted iron mixed with the scent of wet soil made me lightheaded. I reached out and touched one of the vents. The metal was ice cold. I pulled my hand back instantly, not out of fear, but something closer to instinct. a primal kind of caution. While photographing a side entrance, I heard it. A thud, like something had dropped onto the concrete floor below. I froze, didn't move, just listened. Silence. Then, another thud. It wasn't loud, but it had weight. It wasn't machinery. It wasn't the wind. It sounded like a chunk of stone or an old tool fallen from above. Familiar, if you've ever stepped inside a forgotten factory. I crouched and looked into one of the vent openings. It was pitch black, but I could hear my own breathing, heavier than before. I returned to the cabin earlier than planned. That night, Bell Island was eerily quiet. No cars, no crickets, just the wind scraping across the wooden roof. I set my camera on the table and began reviewing the shots. Some were blurry, and I couldn't explain why. I was sure I'd used the tripod and a time shutter. One shot had a white streak running across it like mist, but it had been a dry day. I figured the lens had fogged up, nothing more. Around 3 a.m., I woke up. There was a pressure on my chest, not heavy, not painful, but present, like something was there. I opened my eyes. Nothing, just darkness. The wind whispered through the cracks in the door. I could still smell burnt wood from the stove, now cold. I never fell back asleep. The next morning, I stopped at a small shop. The woman behind the counter, probably in her 60s, asked where I was staying. When I told her it was near Lance Cove, she paused and then said, "No one stays out that way anymore. Those mines. You're better off not going too deep. Some folks have heard voices down there, but there's no one around." I asked, "You mean someone got stuck down there?" She shook her head. "No one knows for sure, but there have been a few who went in and never came out." I wasn't sure how much to believe. But what struck me most, the locals didn't tell their stories to scare. They spoke of these things like they were part of the land, like winter winds or the March fog, real, unexplained, accepted. That afternoon, I decided to return to the mines one last time, just a few more pictures before heading back to the mainland. As I got closer, my phone lost signal. Expected. But what I didn't expect was how fast the battery dropped. Nearly dead within 20 minutes. I set up my camera. I was framing a crooked hallway, streaked with moss. Then, I heard it. A whisper, barely a breath. "Hey." I turned around. No one. I didn't stay long. As I was leaving, I noticed a handprint on one of the vent pipes. It looked fresh, like someone had just pressed a wet hand against the metal. But there was no rain, and the ground was dry. I took a photo of it. But later, when I looked at the image, nothing. No handprint, no moisture. The pipe was clean. I left Bell Island the next morning. The fog on the ferry was thick, smothering. The driver asked me, "Did you see anything?" I said, "I think I heard something." He nodded. "Then you've been touched. Not everyone gets that." I didn't ask him anything else. I still have the photos. Some are blurred for no reason. Some are sharp. Too sharp. Almost unnaturally so. I've never embellished what happened. Every sound without a source, every strange feeling, every scent, that vanishing handprint, they all fall within the realm of what could happen. If you find yourself alone in a place that's old, isolated, and long abandoned, I can't explain it, and I don't plan to.